Let's talk about consciousness for just a minute, because there's really no we here. It looks like it, it feels like it. We can talk about it. We can take pictures of what appears to be separate people and all of that. And they are separate units. Or, you know, that's at least that's the appearance of things. There's really only one thing here, and this consciousness. And what's it doing? It's being conscious. It can only be conscious of itself. I say that because there's not anything else. There's consciousness. Well, there's that which is prior to consciousness, but we really can't talk about that. We can talk around it, and we might, but not right now. This is plenty. There's consciousness. What could you know right now if consciousness wasn't already here? What could you remember if consciousness wasn't already here? What could you experience if consciousness wasn't already here? I don't think you can see or hear or feel or remember or plan or do anything else if there's no consciousness. Consciousness is actually the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of the world, and it's the world, because there's not two. There's not consciousness plus what it looks like or displays as, however you want to put it. There's just the consciousness. We come here to study, come here to experience consciousness, and a little bit of it study, in the sense that we have to come to recognize that when we talk about consciousness, how many of them are we talking about? How many consciousnesses are there? Are there a bunch of consciousnesses, or is there one consciousness looking through a bunch of eyes? And do you know that's what's looking through the eyes of the unit that you call me, and the consciousness that's looking through this body? Do you know that they are different? If you know, I want to know how, because I don't. There's just the one consciousness. Hence, consciousness and what we hear about as oneness would more or less be the same thing, except for that consciousness is not actually visible. This is an expression of consciousness, and this expression of consciousness is visible. Does it mean that there's consciousness plus this expression? No. There is consciousness, therefore there is world. There's the experience of peoplehood, but there's no experience of peoplehood in the absence of consciousness. What can be seen, what can be known, what can be thought in the absence of consciousness? And I'm going to suggest absolutely nothing. Well, consciousness can't not be present. It doesn't come and go. The closest thing to a description of consciousness that I could ever come would be this alive space right here. That this space is consciousness. And what consciousness is trying to do through some units, because it's just not caught on to the trick yet, is the consciousness, which is also oneness, except for the oneness is actually consciousness in drag, because consciousness can't actually be seen. So consciousness is everything, but it's not really everything. What it really is no thing, but it is the potentiality for what we call everything. But what we call everything is really one thing. It's one thing. You can find one thing here, and you, guess what, are included in the one thing. So what's been happening in many circles is actually that consciousness is looking, you can hear it. I know I've got to hook up with consciousness, Fred. I've got to merge with God. I've got to merge with oneness. What is outside of oneness that could ever merge with anything? There's just oneness. There's no one to notice that there's just oneness plus oneness. The only thing that can notice oneness is oneness. Oneness is operating through all these bodies, and it just happens so that when it's doing so, it feels like that there's somebody over here, that there's a separate human being over here under its own direction, or some direction, but not mine, or whatever. I don't think it's a matter of direction. There's just one consciousness, and it is under no direction. Consciousness has this expression because it does. You just notice it does. There's no why to it. There's just this consciousness. And it's expressing like this. The story that I have about that, I can't tell you this is true, but I can tell you it's a well thought out story, is that this outpouring of consciousness is just the only way that consciousness can subjectively experience itself. No, I'm sorry. Can objectively experience itself. in the sense that it can fall in love with itself. It can know itself. To know itself is to fall in love with itself. It's love itself. It doesn't need to fall in love. It's love itself. Although it may not feel that way right now through that individual, because these sets of conditioning, they don't like to give up their sense of individuality. But you're never giving up your individuality. There's no, Fred, what would happen to me if I gave in to oneness? You can't give in to oneness. You can't deny it. You are it. So the very thing that's trying to say, that's saying I don't get it, that's consciousness. The other thing that says, oh, I finally got it, that's consciousness, which means that consciousness finally recognized itself, because there's just this consciousness, and this is the way that consciousness is presenting itself to itself. There's nothing else for it to present to. So consciousness is presenting itself to itself in this manner right now. There's no why, there's no but it should, no whys, there's no shoulds, none of that works here. This is, and boy, we can put a big fat period at the end of that. This is. So what is this? Well, other than saying that it's consciousness, I don't know what it is, and I don't need to know, and you don't either. That's the funny thing. I promise you, if I don't need to know what it is, you don't need to know what it is, because there's really no I here. This is consciousness speaking through the Fred unit to itself through those units right now. There's nothing else. It's the singular possibility. So the thought comes up, I almost get it. I think I'll get it later. The thing to understand is there's just, and this is not so much the now as it is the nowing. This is the nowing. This is the way that consciousness is playing out to itself, for itself. There's nothing in this that's for Fred or against Fred, because there's no Fred here. There's this body here. It was trained to believe that it was a Fred, that it was trained to believe that the consciousness that is experienced through this tool of consciousness, that through this cool tool of consciousness could be discovered. St. Francis of Assisi, when he woke up, he told his disciples, what you're looking with is what you're looking for. And what were they looking with? Their attention. And what were they looking for? Consciousness. And what is consciousness? It is a sense of localized conditioning, sense of localized awareness that feels like there's a me here. I was told I was a Fred Davis. And Betsy and I have been messing around here all day trying to get my birth certificate together, because my name is different everywhere you look. It's Fred Davis, it's Fred S. Davis, it's Fred Shepard Davis spelled one way, Fred Shepard Davis spelled another. I haven't really paid much attention to it. I hadn't thought about the fact that it would be pretty critical, especially if Betsy's going to get any insurance or anything. We need to know who died. But there really is no Fred Davis to die. This body will die, because like everything else, everything comes and goes. What does everything come and go in? This space, isn't that right? Whatever arises, so-called, within this space. But within is such a tricky word, because there's no such thing as without. If there's no inside, there's no outside. If there's no black, there's no white. And what you have there is you have the absolute. But the absolute, if it deems for there to be experience, it's going to have to pretend that there's somebody else there. It's going to have to pretend that it's one, and then have to pretend that there's another, which is absurd, but it seems to be able to get away with it. So as we talk today, notice what's talking. What's talking is consciousness, and it's using this unit to do it. I always thought this unit had consciousness, but it doesn't. Consciousness has this unit. Then if this unit gets knocked in the head, then it's not operating. But consciousness has not stopped operating. It can't. There's no such thing. So it's just that consciousness is expressing, or it's not. And if something gets knocked on this head, it may be expressing through all these other units, but it won't be expressing through this one. And speaking of all these other units, is there really such a thing as other? There's this, then there's the word other. This wallet can't be seen, can't be experienced in the absence of consciousness. Can't be experienced, and this can't be experienced. You can't be experienced to either yourself or to this bit of consciousness. So think of yourself as a carrier of consciousness. And it's not completely unlike being the carrier of a disease, meaning that you may not be awake yourself, so to speak. You may not have come to see the truth yourself, but if you're here, you're radiating some element of that with others. So what we want to do is we just want to get in and we want to cooperate with the emerging expression. The expression is always changing, but the space that holds it is never changing. You are that space. You are that space. You can't figure out that space because there's not space plus something to figure it out. There's just oneness.